Welcome to this live get together session brought to you by getAbstract. We hope that wherever you are joining us from today in the world, that you're having a good week. We're so glad to be able to offer these to all of you. We started these get together sessions a couple of weeks ago in order to get you resources in context, no matter where you are within your organization, whether you're an employee or a leader, managing a remote team, working remotely, no matter who you are, that you have the resources that you need in order to navigate the current pandemic crisis that we are all facing wisely and professionally so that we can come out on the other side of this stronger. That's what we are all about. Also want to let you know, while I wait for some more people to sign on, that getAbstract is offering its entire library free until May 18th. So we want to share these resources with you, a library of over 22,000 abstracts. So please go to abstract.com, take advantage of that resource. And you can also sign up there for our free daily newsletter, the journal. So while you're online, please do that so you can get the latest updates and some of the articles that we are reading and putting the current crisis into context. Today, we're going to be talking with Allan Schweyer, who's over there on the other side of the screen. I'll introduce him in a second, about the HR crisis solutions. Obviously, HR departments are a big part of helping organizations navigate all of this. And so we're going to be looking at how HR departments can thrive in a crisis. And all right, so Allan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kirsten. Very pleased to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So Allan is the president of TMLU. He's chief academic advisor at Incentive Research Foundation, and he is an HR expert. And that's why we're glad to have you on to talk about this important topic. But first of all, where are you joining us from? And how are you doing in your corner of the world amidst this pandemic?
Well, for those of you familiar with the sort of Savannah, Hilton Head area, I'm right in between in South Carolina. So we're a coastal community, small town, and people have been just remarkably good, I think, at following the social distancing and, stay-in-place orders that have been coming in. And I think we're coming through it quite well in our little corner of the world, as well as could be expected. And really looking forward to the day that we can start easing off and getting back and seeing our friends again without sitting in golf carts or cars 20 feet apart from each other and yelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we definitely all are. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about, is how HR departments, but also leaders, handle this transition back to the workplace, because it's going to look different. And the book that we're actually discussing is Leadership in the Eye of the Storm by Bill Thibault from 2016. And so I want to talk about leadership, obviously an evergreen topic at any time, but crisis leadership takes something a little bit different. What are some of the most important elements of crisis leadership, or particularly managing people at a time of crisis?
Well, you're right, Kirsten. I think really at any time, leadership is always comes to the fore. I think there are probably more of those 22,000 abstracts you mentioned written about leadership than maybe any other topic. But given the volatility of the times, good leaders should really expect crises and be ready for a range of disruptions, whether it's a pandemic that we're going through now, a financial crisis that, we went through not 10 years ago, just about, increasingly bad weather, coming through climate change and other related disruptions. Every leader in every firm needs a plan so that when a crisis hits, people know what to do and who to talk to, and they're not scrambling or panicking as it occurs. During the crisis, where we are right now, I think books like Bill Thibault's Leadership in the Eye of the Storm, and Crisis Leadership too is another book along the same lines by Lawrence Barton, are both really excellent references for anyone interested in this topic. They say a lot of the same things, that leaders must really operate with transparency, tell the truth, be honest about the situation, and empathy, emotion, recognizing how people are feeling about this crisis. Above all, though, I think leaders need to inspire courage and resilience by sharing their vision for the organization as it comes through the crisis? What's it going to look like on the other end?
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. You cut out for a second and I didn't hear you then. Can you still hear me? Just want to make sure.
I can still hear you, Kirsten. I just said, I'll just repeat that last little bit that,
Yeah,
above all, I
please.
think, inspiring courage and resilience. And the way that Bill and other authors have talked about doing that is to have a clear vision, an optimistic, vision for how the organization is going to emerge from this as we come out of the crisis.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, what are some of the biggest challenges that HR departments are facing right now? What are you hearing? And how do these challenges look different than what they face on a normal basis? Because obviously they're dealing with probably what they would call crises a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, that's true, but this one is particularly, acute and sensitive, and I think leaders are front and center in any crisis. That's really their job, but HR has a real critical role too. Um, in this case, in coronavirus and in many other crises, the first thing is safety, health and safety. If in the case of the CV-19, if the organization isn't already closed, for example, then coming up with the policy as to who should show up for work. That's employees and contractors, even to some degree the supply chain as it comes on site. Keeping employees safe by social distancing, obviously, but also what are the procedures, the rules and the support around if you should feel ill or have a symptom, that you should stay home and who you should contact, and the support that the organization will afford you doing that. And that includes knowing the types of advice, where they might go to get help, to get tested if that's the situation, what their health coverage might cover. In the United States, there's a lot of confusion around whether it's in network or out of network. And when you're suffering from something that might be the CV-19 virus, the last thing you want to do is worry about whether or not you're going to have a massive bill at the other end of it. So HR can really help in those cases. Also supporting leaders in this transition to remote work and virtual teams. More and more, I think organizations were doing a little bit of that prior to CV-19, but now it's 80, 90, 100% of the organization that might be working remotely. And who's the expert within the organization on managing virtual teams? HR ought to be helping managers through this, giving them tips, assembling information, curating best practices and getting that to them. We could go on and on about the challenges, as you point out, that HR is facing right now, but those are certainly some of the basic things that they could be doing and should be focusing on right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's so helpful. And I just want to say, if there are people working in HR departments who are watching this right now, you are such essential members of the organization, and thank you. It's like frontline, because the organizations are going through so much trauma at the moment. And as you mentioned, all the shift to remote work. And so I just want to say thank you. I think you deserve a lot of thanks and credit. And I just
Absolutely.
also would like to mention that if at any time anyone has a question that they would like to share, or a comment or something that's working for your organization, please at any time put those in the comments. I'll be watching them, and of course bring them to our guest or share them. So at any time, just hop in there with a question or say hello. We always like it when people say hello. So something that Bill talks about in the book, Leadership in the Eye of the Storm, is people-focused crisis response. And I love the way that he talks about empathy and emotion and letting people heal, and that takes time. I mean, it's very much focused on a people-based response. How do employers help their team members feel valued and feel heard in this situation?
Yeah, excellent question, Kirsten. It's, I think, probably top of mind for all leaders, whether you're an executive, a manager, or a supervisor right now, as to how you do this. In the past, one of the practices that I think HR experts and professionals and organizations were trying to um, impress upon leaders was to performance manage people, if you will. It's an awkward phrase, but by concentrating on their behaviors, their outputs or outcomes, the things they achieve, perhaps more than FaceTime. It's so easy to say, Sally's been in the office for the last 10 hours. She seems to work 60 hours a week and never goes home. Wow, she's a high performer. And maybe she is, but there's another element, I think, to that that managers are really starting to see now. And HR is, I think, probably, if there's any silver lining, happy about, because they're learning to assess a person's performance based on their behaviors and outcomes a little bit more. But on the question of feeling valued, I mean, simply recognize people for those types of things. A person who reaches out and helps a colleague through Skype or Zoom or any number of these tools and shares knowledge, for example, that's a behavior you want, whether there's a crisis or not. Well, recognize that. It's even more important now. There was just a survey done by the Society for Human Resource Managers here in the US, sure, well, it's a global organization. 71% of employers said that they're struggling to adjust to this remote work, and 65% of that was that question of how employees feel valued and engaged and keeping their morale up. Well, recognition and appreciation is more important perhaps now than ever. When you look at motivational theories over the last 100 years, whether it's Maslow or any theory since, and then you look at more modern neuroscience and the findings from the science, you see consistently that social connections are a foundational human need, as important as food and shelter in reality. And here we're really tested because people are, especially people who are alone, people who don't have a partner that they live with, are feeling isolated. So more than ever, I think managers and leaders need to connect with people, connect remotely, do virtual get-togethers, book clubs for sure. I mean, we're getAbstract, of course, but we promote books. But reading a book or an abstract and talking about it as a group is a fantastic way to collaborate and bring people together. So, those are a few of the things I think you can do to inspire a remote workforce and keep it connected during these times.
Absolutely. So many good things that you mentioned. I am wondering, a huge part of a leader being empathic, helping people feel valued, and offering a vision, like you mentioned, for coming back to the workplace and what the organization is going to look like in the future, is having, frankly, an enemy, the competitor, or some other force, like we're working against this and we're going to propel toward this vision, toward this future against this enemy, right? Well, what happens when that enemy is invisible? Like the coronavirus, for example. Does leadership look different when the enemy is a visible competitor versus when the enemy is something you can't see, you can't touch, you can't anthropomorphize, like a virus?
Yeah, no, I love that question, Kirsten. And let me say, even before diving into that, you said something about having that visible sort of enemy. A lot of organizations like to inspire their workforce by, pointing out a competitor and saying, let's beat them. Let's be the best in the industry and beat them. Questionable practice, I think, in the best of times, because you should, not let another organization be the benchmark for what you're doing. I think Apple and Steve Jobs, rest in peace, used to talk about that quite a bit. I'm seeing in the industries I work in more cooperation and collaboration between competitors. So yesterday I was on a session for an hour and a half with competitors in the travel industry, one of the hardest hit industries in this crisis. And they were sharing ideas. They were helping each other, talking about things that they were doing that were working, and how they were thinking about coming out of the crisis. And nobody was holding back. And I'm sorry, part of the problem of this crisis is we're working from home, and I have a landscaper on my porch right now with a gas blower. So if you hear that, I apologize.
It's real. This is real life, Alan. It is all good. I love it. It's all good.
Yeah.
Not a distraction at all.
Well, I just wanted to say that part about the collaboration, because hopefully some of the things that we're doing now, like learning how to work with remote teams and collaborate virtually, will stick. There'll be things that we continue afterwards. But the question you asked, the visible versus invisible enemy, I just read, I don't know if you can see here, A Splendid in the Bile, and it made me think it's got nothing to do with pandemics. It's a book about how Winston Churchill and his family, and Londoners in general, or Britons in general, coped with around 18 months of bombing almost every night during the early part of World War II. And the enemy was obviously very visible in that sense. And the threat was audible, it was visible, it was visceral, and much, much different than what we're looking at today. But as most of you know, any student of history at all, really, that Churchill goes down as one of history's greatest leaders, not for any military, social, or even economic accomplishment. His real soul claim to being one of the greatest leaders of all time in many people's books is he was able to inspire. And he transferred his personal courage, his resilience and vision to the British people in a time where, really nearly everybody had written England off. Even America had written England off at that point, for sure. But Churchill didn't promise a rose garden. He promised blood, sweat, toils, and tears, as everyone knows. But he kept his vision throughout, his vision of a victory for England. And I think that's really important. I don't think we can compare the CV-19 to a world war in terms of its scope and impact. But the challenge for leaders could be even more difficult with this invisible enemy in some ways. The enemy can't be demonized, as I think you were talking about, Kirsten. Nevertheless, the main responsibility, I think, stays the same in any serious crisis, that the inspiration and the care and the empathy for a leader's people, their followers, their employees, is the key ingredient here. And Churchill, in reading the book, and I read the book during the beginnings of the crisis and couldn't help but thinking of the parallels. He walked the streets, he visited the hospitals after each bombing. The CEO is not going to visit the hospital, of course, but they can get on web calls. They can ask people how they're doing, how they're feeling. They can recognize people's efforts. They can share information honestly, good and bad, while communicating that positive and optimistic vision for the future. So, I think there's a lot of similarities, whether it's visible or invisible. The invisible has its own, maybe some unique sets of challenges, but the response as a leader might be almost exactly the same in terms of inspiration and setting that vision for the future.
I love that. Thank you for giving us that historical reference. And I think it is really nice. To be able to have those role models in history that we can look at. So I'd love to know from you how, we talked a little bit about how leaders can inspire and engage their remote teams. And I'd love to ask you, how are organizations changing now? I mean, I think the remote working experience is one that we can all point to, but how else are organizations changing now that leaders might be looking at and saying, hey, these are some things I definitely want to take forward into the future of my company?
It's a big question, and I guess we just did a survey at the Incentive Research Foundation. We only published it yesterday, and we saw that despite the crisis, 75%, a large majority of companies that had, and this is a small example, but I think it's telling, that had rewarded top performers with a travel. So in a lot of cases, one of the most popular ways to recognize high performance and accomplishment is to send someone on a all expenses paid trip to a great location where they can relax and savor their good work. It's very effective. Of course, in this time, it's impossible. So what do? You you have to cancel or postpone the trip. But 75% of the organizations are finding other ways to recognize those top performers. Handwritten thank you notes from the CEO. And what I really love too, a big chunk of them have figured out how to, the virtual cocktail hour that we're hearing about all the time, and people getting very creative that way. Well, they did virtual reward sessions where not only the people who were recognized with the travel reward, but more people in the company were pointed out and recognized very specifically for the things they were doing, appreciated, thanked, and held up as examples. So, I think, this is I've said it a couple of times, just extremely important. Getting people together and continuing to engage them and continuing to recognize their efforts throughout this crisis. So,
yeah. I love that. Really wonderful ideas. So we've got a question from Facebook that I would like to pose to you. This is from Sandy. She says, I love the idea of competitors and even coworkers banding together now more than ever. What can we do to ensure this continues after the pandemic is over?
Great question, Sandy. I think by remembering how well it worked and acknowledging that, you're not giving away trade secrets that are going to sink you and help a competitor. I think would be extremely rare to happen in one of these calls. You're building industry goodwill. In the case of the travel industry, what I was so impressed with was that the people that happened to be on this call were individuals who put together events and meetings, which have all been canceled. There were a great number of them have been canceled or postponed till later in the year or even 2021, 2022. But they were empathetic about the hotels. It wasn't what I expected, which was how do we get our money back? How do we get those hotels and get our lawyers on those hotels so we can get our money back and all those event venues? It was more, well, we got to talk to them and understand their perspective and how they're suffering. And it was the same for the airlines. Now, the airlines are getting more bailout, but still there was the empathy for airlines and especially the workers at airlines who are being furloughed. And I just saw a great deal of this. And I think, look, we don't have time to get into how capitalism is evolving, but it is evolving. And it's evolving more towards collaboration and cooperation, at least in the places where capitalism is thriving. It's thriving in new ways. So I think doing some of these things now, whatever industry you're in, bringing together people in one of these sessions, asking them how they're coping, asking them to share how they think about ways to emerge from this successfully. We recorded our sessions. We're not naming names and statements, but I think doing that will remind people of how useful this is, and hopefully that will stick afterwards.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And actually, we have just a really neat example from Lauren. She mentions incentives are great. As a way to keep our minds sharp and body healthy, getAbstract owners challenged employees to work out weekly and track it and offered to buy them Apple Watches. It's really helped to get employees outside more during breaks and keep our minds fresh. I just think it's really fabulous, and wanted to share that. So it's part of that incentive that you mentioned. Allan, last question for you. You look around at what's happening right now, and leaders are always making 5-year plans, 10-year plans, etc. But you look around and think, oh, how could anyone have planned for this? But actually, despite the unexpected nature of the crisis, leaders actually can prepare and make plans for extraordinary circumstances. What would you recommend?
Yeah, really good point. That is probably good practice number one, just to expect these things, whether it's a pandemic or a disruption or crisis of any other nature. One of the books that I've read recently directly on this topic is a good one called The Pandemic Century by a medical historian named Mark Huttingsbaum. And another book called The Next Pandemic. Now, Mark's was written in 2019. The Next Pandemic was written by a virologist and epidemiologist named Ali Khan in 2016. But both of these books essentially predict this. They essentially predict that a respiratory type-based pandemic will emerge in the next few years, and remember this is 2016 and 2019, and it will eclipse SARS in its severity. Remember, SARS was contained to a large degree in a few countries. So if you look at the pandemic century, the reason he named it that is because he looked over the past 100 years and found all sorts of epidemics and pandemics. I think there were more than 10 in all. We had, if you think about it, the Spanish flu, which was the worst of all. But we had AIDS, we had SARS, we had Ebola, we've had the, I forget the name of the pandemic that closed the Brazil Olympics. Remember, with the mosquito-based
the Zika virus.
The Zika virus. The Zika virus, yeah. I mean, many more. We had Legionnaire's disease, mostly in the US, but I think it spread beyond that in the 70s. Every generation, it seems, has an epidemic, at least, if not a pandemic, to deal with. And that's on top of every other crisis that unfortunately is facing us. And, I think most people would agree that these types of disruptions and crises are accelerating more than they are decreasing. If you think 9/11, then we had the financial crisis, now we have CV-19. There's no real excuse, I think, for any leader, organization, or country now to be caught on it's just going to happen. It's going to happen again, unfortunately. What we've learned, though, I think, from the work that I've just cited is, at least in the case of a pandemic, harsh seeming, even draconian measures, ripping off that Band-Aid, seems to work more effectively than waiting and seeing. The problem with that, of course, is no politician wants to shut an economy down unnecessarily. But I think we've learned time and again, and if we keep these lessons in the back of our head and don't forget, which, Ali Khan is one who says, unfortunately, these things happen time and again, and we just keep forgetting, not just politicians, but people. We just move on and we forget. But the right response is often, at least in terms of a pandemic, to get it over with, to take the pain and shorten that curve, if you will, to get back to normal sooner. I think we've seen that in a few countries that were maybe quicker to act, deeper to act, and now have come out of this, or coming out of this a little bit sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Allan, thank you so much for your wisdom and for sharing your time with us.
Oh, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad. And I think we have a little bit of an echo. So if you all are hearing that wherever you're watching this on Facebook and it's gone. Woohoo. Okay. I was going to say, I apologize for that, but it seems to have gone away now. But just want to say thank you to Allan and thank all of you for joining us and for whatever role you are in your organization. We hope that these resources are helpful to you. And so I want to encourage you again to utilize the free library at getAbstract until May 18th to sign up for that newsletter so you can get the schedule for all of our live sessions coming up. And of course, please share this resource with your colleagues, with someone within your organization, a family member or a friend. That's why we're here, is to provide these for you so that we can all get through this stronger. So please share Facebook, LinkedIn, our Vimeo page, any way that is best for you to reach the people that need it. So wishing all of you a wonderful weekend. We will be back here again on Monday, so stay tuned to our social media feeds to learn more about our guest and topic. But we wish you a wonderful weekend. Stay strong, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Extraordinary challenges require extraordinary responses from thought leaders, company executives, and employees. As the coronavirus pandemic unfolds and businesses scramble to adapt to escalating containment efforts, getAbstract is here to help organizations navigate this crisis wisely and professionally. For over 20 years, we've been committed to providing relevant knowledge from reliable sources to help people make better decisions in their personal and professional lives. In line with our mission to empower decision makers with relevant knowledge from trusted sources, we are proud to offer businesses free access to our full library until May 18. Embark on a no-strings-attached knowledge journey with getAbstract. Sign up today.